are down.
She does hybrid.
Right. So it makes sense that she'll get married.
Yeah.
So it's like really
They need to meet.
Hey, let's go.
how do you approach someone?
Was it?
It's very interesting too.
Yeah, it's like, straight here from work. It sounds great.
Okay, y'all, we're gonna go ahead and get started, and I'm just gonna just start us out with kind of introducing us to what we're here today for. So good afternoon, welcome everyone. I'm really happy that y'all came and made this a priority of your day. This is the first Policy Insiders panel of the semester. And so the Policy Insiders Advisory Committee is a graduate college of social work student organization. And its mission is to bring community leaders to campus to discuss policies and their effects on vulnerable populations. And these are the populations that all social workers serve. And so my name is Serena Ahmed, and I'm co-president.
And I'm Lisa Sargent. I'm the communications manager.
So we'd like to take a moment for some thank yous. So we want to first thank the Council on Cultural Activities for sponsoring our lunch, and One Voice Texas for their continued support. We also want to thank UH Catering for setting up this lunch, and we want to give a big thanks to everyone at the Graduate College of Social Work, with special shout outs to IT, Phoebe and David for making this all possible, and just the whole recording and a lot of other things. They're really amazing. Also, special shout outs to Dean Detloff, Dr. Pritzker, Emily Lieberman, Cindy Cruz, Laura, everyone in the administration offices for just always being there to support us. So today, our topic is mass incarceration and the related policies, and the detrimental and disproportionate effects that this has for Black and Brown communities. With that, we would like to start off this panel with a round of applause for our panelists here today. We have Ashton Woods, co-founder and lead organizer of Black Lives Matter Houston. Natalia Cornelio with Texas Civil Rights Project. She's the Criminal Justice Reform Program Director. And we have Jorge Renaud, the Texas Advocates for Justice organizer at Grassroots Leadership. So as you all can see, we have a panelist here via Zoom video conference. So thank you to the panelists and to all of y'all for your patience as we try this out. This is our first time, and we hope that in the future we'll be able to have, panelists from other cities, states, countries. It's sort of an interesting investment that we're trying to start out. So the panelist biographies have all been passed out to y'all. They don't do them the full amount of justice that they deserve, but they help providing some context. So now we can just go ahead and get started and dive into this discussion. So some of us here know maybe a little bit more about mass incarceration policies and the racial and economic historical basis consequences that it's had. Well, some of us know maybe very little or not much at all. So in an attempt to get us on the similar page of thinking, would you all mind starting us off with a definition of mass incarceration from your wide ranges of expertise, and also just kind of laying out, at least to start out with, the key policies that you've run into that perpetuates these systems of exploitation and oppression in your work. And Jorge, if you can't hear me at all, just let me know and I'll speak louder. Sorry. Thank you.
So, my definition of mass incarceration is slavery. No ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, of course, we have to unpack and peel those onion layers back to discuss what it really means, but it boils down to slavery. It's always been that. The Second Amendment, the 13th Amendment, all of those things lead to mass incarceration, the war on drugs, all of these things that someone decides to run for office and says is a problem, and it is almost always geared at someone who looks like me, a black or brown person.
Well, I'll agree with that definition. We've been talking about this a lot in my program lately, and figuring out other ways to say mass incarceration so that it has some meaning, because it's a phrase that has almost been watered down. Not really, but it doesn't really mean anything anymore. So some of the words that we came up with is excessive incarceration. I mean, numerically speaking, too many people, a lot of people are in jail. A lot of kids are in jail. A lot of kids are in jail for fights in school. A lot of black and brown kids are in jail. A lot of people are in jail for drugs. A lot of people are in jail that for things that you and I probably wouldn't even think are a crime. I, for example, learned about 11, 12 years ago that there's something called illegal reentry. That's a crime, and literally the federal government puts people in jail for being here illegally after being deported. So it sounds like an immigration offense, and when I would tell people, when I became a public defender in federal court and I represented a lot of people in these types of cases, people thought I was an immigration attorney because it sounds like it. But it's actually a criminal law that incarcerates people for years at a time. The maximum penalty in some of these cases is 20 years. So it's a lot of these things. It's a system that separates families from one another without recognizing that it's doing that. It's a system that is kind of how I remember learning about the Vietnam War, completely disassociated, where there's no accountability by the people that are making these choices to the people that's lives they are affecting. So those are some of the things that I think about when I think about mass incarceration, and of course, communities that are affected by this word mass incarceration is anybody that's ever known or been related to somebody that's in prison, anybody that relies on a job as a security guard at a jail to get by and think that that's what they have to do to make a living, anybody that can't talk to their family members because it costs like $10 a minute to talk to somebody that's incarcerated, and the emotional, psychological, spiritual impact of that kind of separation. Those are all concepts that I connect with the idea of mass incarceration. Jorge, te toca.
Yeah, hi, Natalia, Ashton, good to see all of you. I already can't see you. I will give you a technological nudge or whatever. Y'all can't hear me, I assume, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the question was, what's mass incarceration? Mass incarceration is incarceration. I mean, I hear the comments, we have too many people locked up. That assumes that there's a finite number, then maybe it's okay, right? That, okay, we lock up, what, 2.3 million people in this country right now? Yeah, so if we had 1.5, would that be good? If we had 987,000, right? Is that acceptable? I think one of the things that we've done is, for everyone in that room, or most people in that room, under 25, 26, 27, I would think, you were in your lifetime. We've locked up 2 million people. This has become normal to you, right? That's one of the things that the concept of mass incarceration has done. It has made it somewhat acceptable to wake up in the morning and say, this is the way that we deal with individuals who we find problematic, with individuals who we see, different from ourselves. As Ashton pointed out, you could probably draw a straight line from slavery to convict leasing to Jim Crow to the beginnings of what we call mass incarceration, but as an abolitionist, as someone who believes we put people in cages because we have so traumatized individuals that they commit behaviors or whatever that we find ugly or as a way to ostracize them or remove them from society, then we have used the concept of the cage and the concept of registering someone when they leave and discriminating them against them for the rest of their life when they apply for loans or for housing or for employment or whatever as somewhat normal. I don't know how many of y'all, it looks like everybody in that room is a person of color. I don't know, but if I would ask you to raise your hand, if you have a family member who's incarcerated, I bet a good percentage of you would. And the thing is, you probably heard that, hey, that Tio Pedro has a hard time getting a job. The Tia Cuchana, she can't, there's a lot of things that she can't do, that she can't go to school because they won't give her a loan. We say in our communities, we too often default to, ¿sabes qué? Aguántate. They shouldn't have done that. We have normalized the idea that this is the proper and the just way to deal with people who we no longer care for. I think that's massive postage.
Thank you so much.
So you touched on a lot of really great points. This is a continuation of the first question. Can you give us a quick snapshot of mass incarceration in the U.S. or Texas, if you have those stats offhand? How many people are confined? What communities are most affected? And any major reasons that people end up incarcerated?
let you take this one.
So I have it as a top of my to-do list to have these stats memorized and readily available because I should know. But I don't, but Google does. And I recommend looking that up. It's very high stats. One example that I will share with you guys that's directly related to the question is that we recently learned that in Harris County, the pre-trial detention rate for juveniles, so that means before their cases are adjudicated, that's a fancy legal word for resolved by either conviction, dismissal, acquittal. The disparities of black to white for kids who are considered low-risk offenders using the risk assessment tool that's perpetuating the Harris County system is 90 to 9. And for brown to white, it's about 56 to that same 9. And the numbers are similarly disparate for kids that are considered middle offenders. So this is something that I just recently got the numbers for, and I can share with you guys those stats because I think that, you know, my job is litigating. So sometimes I'm limited to like, well, how do you solve this problem as a lawyer? But a problem like that takes way more than lawyers. And by the time the lawyers get to it, you know, if anyone's listening to us, it's been a long movement with a lot of players working really hard to bring attention to something and fix it. So that would be something that, for example, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, but it would be great to have students and social workers and professionals involved in work that really has to do with society and civic engagement and dignity, you know, taking that on. Be like, what's going on here? Like, is it one racist judge? Is it 50 racist judges? Is it racist prosecutors? Like, what is that all about? And how do we take that on and hold people accountable to recognize that what they're doing is slavery?
Okay, repeat after me. In order to look at mass incarceration holistically, we can't just quantify it.
We can't just quantify it.
In the statement. Here's the thing. In 2016, I remember looking at numbers from as late as December of 2016 where they talked about people being in jail for victimless crimes. This means that if you got stopped for a broken headlamp in Harris County and you were black, you were at a 90 percentile rate of going to jail for having a broken tail light. Not marijuana, not paraphernalia, a broken tail light. So everything that we talk about, and I'm being very specific to Houston and Harris County, everything that we talk about with regard to mass incarceration lends itself to the bail bond system, which if you've noticed this in recent news, that there's a judge named Michael McSpadden. Him and probably 12 other judges, maybe 14 total, after the Texas legislature passed a bill to allow PR bonds to take place in the state of Texas, they put it in the hands of these judges. And these judges in Harris County, including Michael McSpadden, on the basis that black men are risks, quote unquote. He said this in the Houston Chronicle, that black men are risks, and that ragtag groups like Black Lives Matter are telling them to resist the police, and that's just a bad way of thinking. I'm just paraphrasing here, but that's direct. Here's the problem with this. When we put something in someone's hands instead of abolishing it altogether, we're continuing the system of mass incarceration by keeping people in jail for months at a time, years at a time, just because they cannot pay a bond to get out on a victimless crime. A stolen Snicker bar, an ounce of marijuana. I mean, hell, at some point in our lives, we will all entertain the fact of walking down the street carrying a blunt with our friends and looking over our shoulders. Life is stressful. We need a way out. But if we keep building a system or supporting a system, clearly that is rooted in DNA level white supremacy, how in the hell else can we deal with this? So the numbers do matter, but qualitatively, let's look at the reasons why. How did it happen? Where did it start? And why is it continuing? Is what I would be asking right now.
Jorge, do you want to answer this one, or should we go to another question?
I just want to say very quickly that I can't hear Natalia or Ashley, so I am unable to augment what they say, and I would probably say something again that they probably said more eloquently. So yeah, if you have something just specific, just feel free to ask me again.
Got it. So kind of after Ashton just spoke though, I don't even want to focus anymore on the quantification. You know, it's kind of a mic drop.
My bad.
No. I think that we should move into a different discussion and into that more qualitative piece. So if you wouldn't mind, we're gonna move past question 2, if that sounds good? Okay. So maybe you can start us off for the third question. So this question is basically, I was watching a panel on mass incarceration, and it had Michelle Alexander and Angela Davis on the panel. And I thought that the facilitators posed a really good question. It was basically in thinking about strategies and goals, and we're kind of going to go back and forth between root causes and what we need to do to push forward. But this one is thinking about strategies and goals to address this issue. How do we address the contradiction in terms of reform and abolition? That is, how do we advance an ending to mass incarceration or incarceration while simultaneously engaging in reforms? How do we know which reforms will lead us to that larger vision and which ones are going to take us back? Jorge, would you want to start us out? It's that third question. I'm sorry if you can't hear me.
No, that's fine. I'm right now sitting in the Commissioner's Court in Travis County. We're all fighting against jail expansion. They want $97 million to expand the capacity because of what they call a 3.8% projected uptick in women's population, right? They always do that. They always say percent increase of the number of bodies that they're actually going to incarcerate, right? They say, oh, it's just percentage. We had a conversation about this the other day, and we had a conference call. They had, in the jail, or the county officials invited the coalition to a conference, to a meeting on the design. And there were a lot of individuals who said, no, we can't show up to help design this, or whatever. And of course, if we don't show up to help design, then it's being designed by penologists, by county officials, by guards, and you don't have the voice of the advocates of the women who are inevitably going to be there. Because we are not at the point where right now we can open up every jail cell. It's just not going to happen. The tension between, I think, abolitionists and prison reform advocates is, from what, in my experience, is almost always by individuals who have not been to prison, who find it somewhat easy to say, you know what, if you cooperate with the keepers, and you are basically perpetuating that system. As someone who spent 27 years in prison and has a lot of friends now and who has come out and has a master's degree in social work now, I've found it incredible for people to tell me that how can you keep going back to prisons? How can you go down to the Capitol and advocate for what is basically just a better prison, a softer bed, curtains around it, and aren't you just helping perpetuate the system? I think the way that you resolve that dichotomy is that you always operate for the sake of. You are never agreeing or proposing an argument that says, you know what, you would save money if you do this, and there's more money that you can give to education, right? Because then what you do, you commodify an individual, and if a deep-pocketed conservative like Charles Koch comes around and says, you know what, we will pay for all the prisons, then you're left without a goddamn argument. Excuse my language. But then you just see, like, then what do you do, right? You know, okay, we're not saving money anymore. The argument has to have a moral base. It has to have a moral foundation. And you always have to keep the end goal that is, what are you doing this for the sake of? And the sake of this is you're trying to build a society that realizes the trauma that it inflicts on individuals from the time that they're born. And that trauma is a huge reason and gives birth to the behaviors of the actions that we have come to say, you know what, these are the actions of individuals who should be in the cages. And almost exclusively, these actions are those that belong to black people, to brown people, to women, to the LGBTQI community. It's not to white males. Right? So I think as long as you are always demanding from the individuals, from prison officials, from county officials, from your legislators, for the sake of, as long as you're always seeing individuals and not percentages, as long as you're not seeing, concrete edifices instead of the communities from where these individuals come from. As long as you continue to make that argument, then you retain the moral right to say, however, for the sake of that, we as a society have to ensure that our prisons, that until we get rid of them, find a better way, we still have to keep the individuals in there like the human, like the, as we say, ser humano, right? As living, breathing human beings, right? All of them, from the individual who we romanticize because he or she raps or writes poetry from outside, right, to the person who neither one of us would admit to our community because that person has brutalized the most vulnerable in our communities. Either it's all of us or it's none of us. So that's the way that I tell it that.
Thank you so much.
So that kind of takes us into.
Do y'all want a chance though?
I'm okay.
No, you're good.
So that kind of takes us into our next question in terms of stakeholders. The stakeholders and the players involved in mass incarceration. So who are all the players or the stakeholders to look out for when pushing for policy reforms in this issue? And do you find some more important to target for change than others? I guess since we're talking about Houston, we can talk about maybe certain people in the Harris County system or Texas overall.
Well, here's the thing. Mute your microphone, bro. So here's the thing. You gotta know who to be pissed off at. You gotta know who to be pissed off with. You gotta know who to talk to, right? You can't go to city council and complain about your child's school when you need to be at the HISD school board meeting, right? So here's the thing. Texas is a very odd state in that every single judicial seat, with the exception of some appointments, are elected seats, all the way up to our Supreme Court. Our commissioners court are elected seats. Our legislature are elected seats. These are the bodies that you need to be paying attention to when you want to reform or actually create new policy, because we keep talking about reform as opposed to just starting with a new foundation and working with what we knew worked and throwing out the trash, right? What didn't work. Once we do that, we talk about shaping policy. For example, I was in Austin for quite some time helping with the Sandra Bland Act and a few other bills that actually got passed into law for 27 million Texans. That's important because when you're in the room, you're able to say, listen, you get the right legislators, like in the House, the Texas House and the Senate, those people who are friendly to your cause, who may be able to relate to you. For example, people like Garnett Coleman, Symphonia Thompson, quite a few people who are willing to write a bill, and not just write a bill, hold hearings about something. The way the Sandra Bland Act was born was because Garnett Coleman is the chair of the Prisons Committee, the chair on prisons and jails. And at that point in time, it was 2015, it was right after we led that protest in Waller County at the Waller Jail following the death of Sandra Bland, the murder of Sandra Bland. And he initially, for like 2 days, I think it was 2 days, he had people coming from Austin, all over Texas, all over Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and they testified. That testimony from people with lived experience helped to shape this bill. So when you're in the community, and this is where community comes in, which is something I didn't mention. If you are plugged in with your civic organizations, you got to go a little bit further. You got to show up if you really give a damn. Meaning, it's not going to come easy to you, this information. You got to actually walk your way through and read through and talk through and follow through and do things that are quite annoying to get to the proper information that you need. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to go long, but the thing is that this is important. Once you know what your community needs and actually hear your community, it circumvents certain politicians from calling elected officials and people who are who have reverend or bishop in front of their name to come and speak for an entire community without consulting with us, right? Because there are people who consider leaders but don't lead, and that's very dangerous. Because there was a bill that John Whitmire authored back in the last legislative session that called for children learning how to complain later, basically. We're going to teach you, as a part of your force curriculum, in the STAR test curriculum that is, to how to be polite with the police and complain later after they've shot you. Right? How can I complain if I'm dead? So you have to be careful about that. I bring up the Commissioner's Court. The Commissioner's Court decides on funds for the prisons in Harris County, prisons and jails in Harris County. They pay for your parks. They pay for the Harris County hospital system. That body alone is so independent that they're pretty much outside of the governance of the state, give or take some parameters. That's the body that can change everything. For example, how do you think Kim Mogg, if you've been paying attention last year, we worked with her, with Bill in Houston, was able to instrument the no prosecution policy or the no arrest policy around marijuana? It's not that she is making a new law, legalizing it. She found a loophole in state law that says that you can prioritize what you decide to convict. Meaning, if you convict less victimless crimes, there are less people in jail. As of today, from what I understand, we have a 75% participation rate, which is the highest for any diversion program in the country. There's about 1,000 people who probably missed out because of the hurricane and are probably working their way back. But these are the things that we have to do. We have to get people in who we can influence and work with. We may not agree with them all the time, but this is a strategy of no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, strange bedfellows, for a lack of a better phrasing. It's important so that when you meet with these community stakeholders, these commissioners, these county commissioners and your district attorneys, these are the people who can go to Austin and testify and say, listen, well, we've been talking to the community and we don't like this bill either. A lot of the criminal justice bills in Texas before 2016, really 2017, were killed because we had Devin Anderson and Ron Hickman. You realize that the police unions and different organizations, even teachers unions, can go to a hearing because they hear about this. We don't check in. Like those of us who have access, let me not be ableist and be sound elitist. For those of us who have access, means, and ways to do what can be done, we're not checking in like we can. We're always too busy to do this shit. Excuse my French. But the fact of the matter is you bring people with you after you got all of those other stakeholders, your commissioners, your DAs, and all this other stuff, and you get bills passed because you have people on your team. You have electeds, you have community stakeholders, you have people who are directly affected who may be able to say something, and without that, we won't be able to not only reform but abolish and create new policy that helps us to get past the situations that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely, Ashton. I think that, and it's a lot of work, and it's not sometimes just you. It's about you doing the work to know what the community needs. But back to kind of loop this question with your last question, if reform comes from the community, I don't think it's possible for it to take a step back, because even if it's the wrong choice, it's part of the process, and what's being moved forward is the community's involvement and learning from their mistakes, or learning from, not even mistakes, from their processes, from their practices, from what they're trying to do. Just kind of in a similar vein, I'm going to testify actually at 2 o'clock today in front of City Council regarding a ordinance that the City of Houston wants to pass that would restrict where parolees can live, basically. And we found out about this at the end of January. And nobody that actually owns places that house people who are homeless or on parole knew about this. They had 20 stakeholder meetings, the City Council, or the committee, which is called the Committee of Department of Homeland Security. I shit you not. The City of Houston has a Department of Homeland Security. And they had 20 stakeholder meetings, and not a one organization, Magnificat houses, there's crosswalk centers, I should know the names because I've just spoken to these people. All these people that provide these services were not present at any of these meetings. And so luckily we've kind of gotten a little movement going on, and these people's stories, they're going to speak today too at City Council. I don't know if City Council's trying to hear what they have to say, frankly, because the fact that they didn't know about it, and they now have 3 minutes to talk about something that's going to be voted on tomorrow. I don't know that they'll care, but the fact is that clearly when you look at this ordinance and its consequences, the tremendous service that these houses have provided the City of Houston and its population is completely ignored and potentially threatened, or not potentially threatened. This house that I met with, Magnificat houses, they have 16 residences that they have their staff and then residents at. And these residents, a lot of them are parole. They think at least 50% of their residents are on parole. They have 2 thrift stores. They have a soup kitchen. They have a coffee shop. They have a mental health house. So if you have any mental health diagnosis, you can participate in the work of the house, gardening, cooking from 8 to 4. You're encouraged to have structure. You can work at these thrift stores at every level, not just as a cashier. Not that there's anything wrong with it being a cashier, but you can actually be a person that is in charge of receiving shipments, organizing how everything is set up in the thrift shop. Really,
It's basically restorative justice.
restorative
It's supposed to
justice.
be.
That's rehabilitation for people that have nowhere to go. That is, I mean, and the recidivism rate is literally between 3 and 7% for the people that stay in these houses. So that's public safety, bigger than jail. And city council is trying to pass an ordinance that threatens the livelihood of the organizations that do this work. They're nonprofits. They don't make money. A lot of the people that are the executive directors, they didn't even get paid when they started working for these organizations, and they still do the work. And so, you know, trying to get their voices, and me even hearing their voices, was so important, because I have sometimes a theoretical, like, oh, residency restrictions, that's legally messed up. I can tell right now, this violates this constitutional clause, this constitutional clause. I don't know if the judges will care, but when you do the work to talk to the places that do this service, you're like, oh my God, they're providing a service. We would be damn fools to not, we should give them money. You know, if we are doing what we say we're doing, which is have a safe community, you know, people get released from jail, and then what? And these houses are doing the and then what, and we're trying to shut them down? So we do want people roaming around the street? I don't think that they're thinking about it. So, you know, just to your point, it's a lot of work, and we do get too busy to do that work. But there's the people that know, and get them involved and help them if that's what you want to do.
Well, let me just say this one thing for a second. This is the point of knowing who to be pissed off with, right? How many of you live in Texas, or from Texas, by a show of hands? How many of you live in Houston, by a show of hands? How many of you lived in Houston for more than 2 years? Okay, that's enough. So you know who the mayor is, don't you? Representation is important. It's extremely important. Whether the person be a woman, whether the person just be a person, whether the person is black or brown, various hues, religious backgrounds. But what happens when you put someone in office who knows how to take advantage of the mayoral form of government that they have? Sylvester Turner controls everything that is placed on the agenda during council meetings that gets voted on. Council members do not bring that. They can propose something, but your city government is a very, very monarchical style government. And hear me out. Last year, no, 2016, there was an outburst I had during the city council meeting because they were trying to pass 3 separate ordinances, well, renew 1 and add 2 against homeless people. And I'm saying this because they're building on something here. You go outside, you look under the bridge, you see spikes and rocks now. Can a homeless person lay on that? An ordinance that says that you can't sit or stand on the sidewalk between the hours of 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. in a city that is 652 square miles wide. Sorry, not wide, but of land. That's a lot of city. That's the size of Rhode Island, if I'm not mistaken. Pay attention, y'all. They're saying that they've allotted money for housing for homeless people. They're saying that you can't have tents or grills. You can't have anything that does not fit in a 3x3x3 box. This is criminalization. How can homeless people who about 70% of them may or may not be dealing with mental instabilities or disabilities or any type of ailments, physical or mental, I should say, right? We don't want to be ableist. But listen, this ordinance that she's pointing out is another prong in that. Because if you keep criminalizing people and marginalizing them enough to erase them, to give the air of a welcoming city, but not welcoming the people who are in your own yard. You know, y'all got that one cousin. They paint the house when you're having a gathering together and everything, and they try to they put on airs and they treat your family members and other cousins better than they treat you, and you're like, well, this is nice, and you're sitting there in amazement. This is what this is, y'all. I didn't mean to take that up, but y'all need to understand that this is really deep.
So moving forward, what would you all say are the best strategies for ending mass incarceration that advocates should know about?
Jorge.
Yeah, thank you. Organize. Look for those who've been most directly affected and get them to lead.
Yeah.
Yep.
Find a way to educate. Find a way to educate those that are most affected. The communities from which those who are most affected arise from, which is almost exclusively urban, which is almost exclusively financially distressed, which are almost exclusively communities of color. There are communities of color, and I know this, who have asked for more increased police presence because we have somehow been inculcated and bought into the idea that 911 is a magic number. I think that is maybe, as my brothers and sisters on the panel will agree with, that is hopefully gone by the wayside now, and a lot of it thanks a lot to the efforts of BLM. To the education campaign that they have done, right, to the fact that they didn't just come out protesting, but they advanced along with that a sheet of policy directives that were feasible and achievable, okay? So I think one of the things that we have to do is go into the communities themselves, and a lot of the individuals in the communities where I come from aren't aware of the amount of monies that are being spent on edifices like jails. If you go to most different cities and counties in the United States, some of the newest, prettiest buildings are the jails, right? But if you go to, like, say, here in Austin, down to Gulf Springs, down to Montpelier Center, whatever, you see communities with decayed infrastructure, right? I think that if you educate the communities that there is, in fact, a pot of money that is available, if you do, like I said over and over, find a way to reach those individuals who are elected, right, and find a way to affect them. If you find strategies that will empower those who have been disenfranchised, because in Texas, you can't vote until you're off paper, which means that you can no longer be on probation or parole, right? But however, there is a minimal effort that goes toward educating the individuals who come out of that county jail, who live in those communities, who live whatever, that says that, look, that actually your voice does in fact matter, and that you can vote someone who can in fact respond to the things that are being done to this community. And then again, you have to organize. And by organize, I mean reach out to faith communities, reach out to parole officers, reach out to anywhere where there are concentrations of individuals who are directly affected by this monster machine of criminal justice in this country and specifically in the states, and give those people a voice.
So, Natalia, you kind of touched on this earlier, but while the panel is limited in scope to criminal justice, I think we would be naive and remiss to not talk about immigration prisons, also referred to as immigration detention centers, right? So would y'all be willing to speak to this crisis as well? And how do you conceive of consolidating better solidarity between, maybe sometimes the activists might think of themselves as in different camps, or maybe they don't, and I'm just making assumptions here. And also kind of getting into that, kind of heading back into the root cause of the problem, combining two questions, considering the time. So I think that thinking about this need for solidarity brings up this root cause of sorting through the racial and economic and political motivations of people who would wish to see the system of mass incarceration continue.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that are in civil detention. They can be in civil detention for 6 months at least without having any rights. While they're waiting for an asylum hearing, it could be longer, and the reason that they get an asylum hearing is because they've had an initial hearing with someone who says, oh, I think that you might have a case, that you're scared of going back to your home country, that you've been persecuted, that you've suffered, and you might be a good candidate for asylum, so you should get a hearing. I'm going to recommend that you get a hearing. And the whole time that they are waiting for that hearing, they can be detained. It's a difficult question to really capture. Again, like I said, a lot of people thought that I was an immigration lawyer because there literally are immigration issues that are criminalized. If you are, a felon with a gun, that's a federal crime. But if you are a person who doesn't have citizenship and has a gun, that's also a federal crime. And not only will you experience criminal consequences for it, you'll experience immigration consequences for it. It's a federal crime that makes you permanently removable from the United States, meaning you could get deported and you can't come back. Using a fake paper, that's considered a really serious federal crime, and it's prosecuted really heavily here in the Southern District of Texas in Houston and along the border, and a little bit less so in Arizona and Southern California and New Mexico, but it's along the southwest border in particular. I think that touching on the topic of race, a lot of these immigration crimes are towards Mexicans. I mean, it's not that they're not used against other communities, but this border right here is a manifestation of how we treat our neighbors, criminalizing them, at our whim, like, we'll give you permission to be here to work. Oh no, now you gotta go, even though you have been here for 10 years working for us and raising a family, and I guess since they were born here, they could stay for now, but you gotta go. You can't stay with your kids. And kind of really being so separated from the significance of that. These people that are making these choices, they don't have to be away from their kids. I remember standing in front of judges trying to explain to them these concepts, and they smile and they nod and they're appointed for life, and they're not thinking about their kids. They're not thinking about the fact that incarcerating someone and then deporting them is a severe consequence for them being here illegally. So I don't think it really answers your question. I will say that I do think that, United We Dream and groups are starting to work together. I'm a part of a coalition here in Houston that includes United We Dream, and we're really criminal justice oriented. But there's a recognition that these families, the weaves that the families weave are not just a citizenship, non-citizenship issue, but more likely than not in Texas will involve a relative who's not a citizen and who has a home here in some way, shape, or form. So I'm sorry if that didn't answer your question. It's a really complicated question. It's loaded with so much hate. I'm not from here. I'm from Chicago. My family's Mexican, and I've only lived in the north until Texas 7 years ago, and I just was like, oh my God. I remember I had that movie Django was out, and I was like, this place is like Django. And why do they hate Mexicans so much? It's right there. And there's a beautiful, rich community here. But it's an interesting, transitional home for places too. People deal with their own identity questions and, feel like they have to make choices between fitting in or. There's like a lot of Border Patrol agents are Mexican. It blows my mind. I don't know. Yeah, tell us something.
Can I answer that question?
Please.
I don't know how much time, but the things that I've been doing, we have very pointedly tried to ally ourselves with the immigration movement. We went to a conference in Philadelphia, reimagining immigration and reimagining sanctuary, sponsored by Mi Gente, Arizona, and Puente. We have allied ourselves very closely with United We Dream and others. But I think there are two salient points here that are, at grassroots leadership, we operate on two basic principles. One, any policy that results in someone being put in a cage is a failed policy. Two, crossing a border is not a crime. We operate on the principle of open borders and abolition. But having said that, and any proposed alliance between individuals who are come from the quote unquote the criminal justice camp and quote unquote the immigration camp, right? I think the thinkers and the policy people, the organizers had for a while advanced the idea that we had to fight the notion that, you know what, that one of the big arguments that immigrants make, and you see all the time, you see children making the argument, my father's not a criminal, right? Or you see this sort of isolation of individuals who are worthy of keep staying in the United States, right? Young, perhaps don't have any sort of criminal records, or being educated or whatever, right? But that means that those who are older and maybe have been here 20 years and haven't taken the time to do whatever, maybe have a couple of DWIs, don't deserve the same kind of effort. I think those are internal issues that we need to deal with. But I also understand that no one packs up their belongings and leaves the country of their birth with the belongings on their back and takes the children in tow and crosses a border or a river and goes through all of that unless something drastic has happened to that country's economic infrastructure, right? And almost exclusively the things that have happened to the countries whose economic infrastructure has collapsed and caused immigration to come with is because we have intervened in those countries, because we have gone in and taken the resources from those countries to line the pockets of the individuals who are benefiting from that, who are almost exclusively white males in the United States. So if we don't do that sort of education campaign, if we in the criminal justice movement have to realize that we allow individuals who come from El Salvador or Honduras, right, who when they talk about a criminal, they're talking about specific individuals that was out there trying to rape their daughters, trying to commit whatever criminal acts are in fact happening, and that those people, those innocent survivors who are coming over have a hesitancy toward aligning themselves with people like myself who've been convicted of multiple robberies. You have to allow that space. We can't point fingers and no, you can't be aligned with us because you make the argument that you're not a criminal. You have been criminalized by the government. I get that, right? That does not mean that I demand a certain stance from you or whatever, right? We're all fighting the same machine of oppression. So any true alignment between people who are almost primarily in a criminal justice fight and those who are in an immigration fight, right? I think has to realize that I can't call out a group of faith-based leaders tomorrow because a county is shipping off 20 people to prison. And yet, I can get a drove of people tomorrow if we say ICE is deporting or picked up 20 people and takes them to detention and illegal, right? There are different, varying degrees of empathy there, right? But we have to realize that we're all fighting the same machine. So, anyway.
So,
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
It does. So, hear me loud and clear. I'm not here about phenotypes or race in the context that I'm trying to single out just people who look like me. But I am, actually. Here's the thing. The Afro-Latinos, the immigration comes in black, y'all. One of the things that we have to unlearn as a collective in this country is westernized white gaze, G-A-Z-E. If you've never heard it, Google it. I'm not going to define it for you, but basically, how we look at things in our lens is so different from the way people see it when you step outside of the borders of this country. Actually, when you leave the borders of Texas or Louisiana or any of the other 50 states in the Union, the truth is that a lot of times, and I learned this back in 2015 when we disrupted Bernie Sanders. I was one of the 15, 20 people who helped to plan the disruption of Bernie Sanders and Mike O'Malley at the Netroots Nation Conference. And the reason why is because Netroots wouldn't allow any programming that centered black people and Latinx people specifically, but labeled everything people of color. Right? And when we let people who are not black or brown define who we are, we run into roadblocks that appear as if we are fighting separate fights when we are really fighting the same fight. In actuality, a triumph for the black community is a triumph for the Latino community and vice versa. But the bigger deal is this. When you think about who's in detention, who's in those ICE detention centers, it's not just people who are of the lighter Spanish-speaking variety. They're Africans from every continent that's inhabited, affected by immigration laws. They're dying. They're also being denied abortions. But they're putting a lighter face on this instead of having a spectrum, right? There's room for everybody to show the intersectionality of this fight. And if we don't have proper representation, as I stated earlier, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem because of the emails that I got when I was at Bush and the Continental with everybody else trying to fight to make sure the people who have been detained earlier last year around this time were released and freed. Why are you there? Well, you do call yourself an African American, right? So why are you questioning me about the merits of showing up for immigrants, whether they're undocumented or not? Whether they're coming from countries that have Islamic sounding names or Hispanic sounding names? Y'all see the problem here? It's not about the fact that we're so different. It's about making sure that we respect the lanes of each other's movements and each individual lanes that we walk in, so that if, for example, if I feel like you're not representing everybody enough and I give that critique, don't get upset with me and say, oh, he hates me. No, I'm really telling you, you're excluding someone. It's a microaggression because you don't realize that you're doing it. It's not a one-sided thing. For example, you think about temporary protected status. Who's the biggest recipient of temporary protected status? It's Haitians. It's Afro-Caribbean people who speak Creole and Spanish, right? There's two sides of that coin here. So I guess I'm going to step off my soapbox and conclude by stating this. If we don't respect each other, where we come from, our origins, of where we come from, mute your microphone, bro. If we don't respect the origins of where we come from and our intersectionalities and know that, for example, when we have to take care of stuff at home, you don't let cousin, auntie, or best friend come to the house unless the house is clean, right? Your mom or family member or whoever raised you or whomever you grew up with, your chosen family, y'all know y'all can't welcome somebody in looking a hot ass mess. So there's times that we have to do things at home, and there's sometimes that we have to do things together in each other's houses. And it's okay if I take a little bit of your paprika and give you a little bit of my black pepper. Right? It's okay. It's about the flavor of things. The flavor is off. The very people in this room might be okay and may very well agree with me, but there's about 346 million people in this country that we have to convince otherwise. Y'all ready to do this? Y'all scared to answer? No? Y'all want to do this? Yeah, no, maybe? I'm assuming y'all going to school for sociology or social work, so that means that you want to create change. Social problems create social change, correct? Do something about it.
So Talia has to go and testify right now. But do y'all have any questions for Ashton or Jorge? If y'all are able to stay, and maybe if y'all have any questions to ask.
And feel free to get my email from Selena if you have any questions for me or want to get in touch, and I'll see you tonight.
I'm going to come to City Hall.
Oh, cool.
Actually, I have to go testify at the Commissioner's Court myself.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to follow up with you after this.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank y'all. And yay, social workers. Bye.
Yay, social workers. Bye.
Are you going to speak?
Do y'all have any questions that...